The first discussion topic on today's Peace and Prosperity is U.S. President Donald Trump's North Korea policy, which has emerged as a significant new issue in the U.S. presidential race amid slow progress in nuclear talks with North Korea. U.S. Special Representative for North Korea, Biegun, called on the regime to return to the negotiating table and singled out North Korea's Vice Foreign Minister Son-hui as his counterpart in working-level talks. In response, Choe urged the U.S. to withdraw all of its hostile policy against North Korea, adding if North Korea-U.S. talks fail, the responsibility should lie squarely with the U.S. Meanwhile, in a recent televised debate, U.S. Democratic presidential candidates took turns bashing Trump on his North Korea policy. How will Trump handle mounting criticism from other candidates over his handling of North Korea? We also take a look at how North Korea will respond to the current situation. Today's second discussion topic is the implications of Seoul's decision to conditionally suspend the expiration of its military intel sharing agreement with Japan, or GSOMIA. South Korea and Japan have been sharing military intel under the General Security of Military Information Agreement, or GSOMIA, since it was signed in 2016. The renewal of GSOMIA has been a key issue since August, when Japan removed South Korea from its white list of countries with favorable trade conditions. In late August, the South Korean government decided to terminate the military intel sharing pact with Japan. However, in a last-minute turnaround, 6 hours before the agreement was set to expire on November 22nd, it announced a conditional delay of GSOMIA expiry. Will Seoul's GSOMIA decision help dispel concerns over a weakening of the South Korea-U.S. alliance? How will it affect trilateral security cooperation among South Korea, the U.S., and Japan? To shed light on these latest developments, our host, Bong Young-sik, Research Fellow at Yonsei University's Institute for North Korean Studies, is joined by Lee Shin-hwa, Professor of the Department of Political Science and International Relations at Korea University. To broaden the perspective, we also connect with guest experts on Skype, including John Nilsson Wright, Senior Research Fellow for Northeast Asia at Chatham House, and Soo Kim, Policy Analyst at the RAND Corporation.
Hello and welcome to our program. The Korean Peninsula is once again at the center of international diplomacy, with denucleation talks with North Korea and the issues surrounding the South Korea-Japan General Security of Military Information Agreement, or GSOMIA. On this week's episode of Peace and Prosperity, we go in depth on the implications of the latest developments on inter-Korean and North Korea-US relations, as well as trilateral relations among South Korea, the US, and Japan. Joining with us today to further discuss the situation is Professor Lee Shin-hwa from Korea University's Department of Political Science and International Relations. Welcome to our program, Professor Lee.
Thank you.
All right.
Nice seeing you again.
All right. My first question regards the link between what's going on in domestic politics of the United States, including the impeachment inquiry and the upcoming presidential election, and Trump policy toward North Korea and the U.S.-North Korea dialogue.
Well, obviously, North Korean issue is the table menu for presidential election of the United States. Although the Democratic candidates highlighting the importance of no concessions to Kim Jong-un to bring North Korea to negotiating table, I think that's not only Democratic candidates, it's nothing new. It's been always the big voices among the US community. Although Trump tried to do something for his own political gain, there are always check and balance in the US intelligence and policy community. They have to be more careful. One of the Democratic candidates, Senator Kamala Harris, said the Trump's approach to North Korea is nothing but a photo op for nothing, right?
Right.
But that that indicated that many American public and policymakers and intelligence believe that Trump should be very careful about it. Therefore, although Trump has a very tempting to use North Korean card as one of his tickets to the re-election battle, or try to save himself from impeachment inquiry, I think he will be very careful because unless he making a significant big deal, that will giving him a backfire.
Okay. Let's talk about the new developments initiated by North Korea. Recently, as reported by North Korean state media, on November 25th, North Korea's Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un gave the order to fire artillery shells from the border islet of Changrin, which is regarded as South Korea and the U.S. as a violation of September 19th agreement to reduce military tension. One, are you frustrated by North Korea's provocation of this kind? And two, what is the motivation of North Korean leadership behind this?
Well, I'm not only frustrated, but I'm always furious about their nothing surprised provocation on their own will.
Okay.
Well, the Changrin incident also remind me of Kim Jong-un's visit to Kumgang Mountain last month. As we know, the Kumgang Mountain is kind of a very symbol of inter-Korean cooperation. But without any single consultation with South Korea, he ordered to demolish the South Korean facilities, not to mention of his very nasty word on those facilities, right? And I think that is another warning to South Korea. But as we all know, inter-Korean relationship is not independent variable. Always, the North Korea's relation with the U.S. is independent variable. That means the inter-Korean relation depends on how U.S. and North Korean summit will go. Therefore, if it doesn't go right, I think North Korea would like to say which way the South Korea or Moon Jae-in government will take. So which side you will take. I think that will be a big challenge for us.
Right. So the military provocation like this one is to urge South Korean government to take sides between Pyongyang and Washington.
Yeah, that is toward South Korea, but I think toward the U.S., I think the Kim Jong-un tried to just show that any military option or any military provocation we can make, and as you easily imagine, the South Korea was always easy and first target.
Right.
So that made me frustrated and even furious.
I see. Now we'll hear analysis on Pyongyang and Washington nuclear negotiations from an expert overseas. Joining us on the line is John Nielsen Wright, Senior Research Fellow for Northeast Asia at Chatham House and Senior Lecturer of International Relations at Cambridge University. Hello.
Well, thank you very much for welcoming me onto your show. I'm very happy to be here. My name is John Nielsen Wright. I'm speaking to you from Paris, and I'm Senior Lecturer at Cambridge University and also Senior Research Fellow for Northeast Asia at Chatham House.
Right, welcome to our program. The first question to you is, U.S. President Donald Trump has hinted at the possibility of a third summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. But North Korea has made it clear that talks won't happen unless the U.S. withdraws all of its hostile policy against the regime. But it seems the definition and scope of so-called hostile policy are subject to change at the North's discretion. What do you make of this?
I think what it probably reflects, but of course we don't know absolutely, is that the North Koreans are keen, particularly Kim Jong-un, the leader, is keen to ensure that the United States is willing to substantially relax economic sanctions. The North has made it clear on past negotiations with the Americans, most importantly in the private meetings that took place at the beginning of October in Stockholm, that they are looking for a bigger economic incentive from the United States. And while there has been a temporary cessation of joint military exercises and a scaling back of military exercises between South Korea and the United States, in their public remarks, the North Koreans have made it clear that this is not enough. I think they also recognize that Donald Trump, because of the difficulties he's facing domestically at home as a result of the impeachment scandal, may be more susceptible to pressure from the North to make concessions in those key bilateral talks. So at the moment, the North Koreans are playing hardball.
North Korea's Vice Foreign Minister Choe Son-hui has recently claimed that if North Korea-U.S. talks fail, the responsibility should lie squarely with the U.S. This must be concerning for President Trump, who is up for re-election, right?
I hope it's a source of concern to President Trump, because obviously, if these talks don't go forward, the investment that he has made, the huge political concessions he's made to the North Koreans by meeting with the North Korean leader no fewer than 3 times, will be seen by many people to have been wasted. It's important, therefore, to find a mechanism for keeping these talks going. The danger is that if the North Koreans feel that the United States is not prepared to make substantial concessions, they may do something more provocative. Whether that's more missile launches, there have been no fewer than 12 missile launches just this last year, or perhaps a 7th nuclear test, or further provocations that will lead to a sharp deterioration in the security relationship on the Korean Peninsula. There is, I think, also on the part of Donald Trump, the danger that he is so preoccupied with the impeachment issue that he simply doesn't have the mental space, energy, or commitment to really prioritize these talks with North Korea. And we've already heard that he may be tempted to make concessions to the North that would be troubling for the South Korean government. As you know, Washington and Seoul are locked in very difficult talks at the moment about the level of military spending that South Korea provides to the United States. There have been hints that the White House is prepared to withdraw perhaps as many as 6,000 American troops from the Korean Peninsula. Whether that's designed to make an offer to the North or simply to pressure South Korea is hard to say, but it adds an additional level of uncertainty in the current talks with Pyongyang.
I see. If a third Kim-Trump summit takes place within the year or early next year, do you expect the two sides to deliver concrete results?
I think after the experience of Hanoi, which was a disappointment to both sides, I think it's probably fair to say, there will be a lot of pressure to make sure that this is not another photo opportunity. Pressure from both sides, and both leaders going into those talks will need to feel that something significant has been achieved. And as you rightly point out, this is an election year, of course, in the United States. It's very important that Donald Trump be able to demonstrate that he is succeeding in foreign affairs. And therefore, I would not expect a meeting to take place without prior agreement between Pyongyang and Washington that something materially different will come out of those discussions from what has happened both in the last round of talks in Panmunjom, those brief talks, or the abortive talks in Hanoi.
All right. That is Dr. John Nielsen Wright of Chatham House. Thank you very much for sharing your insight.
Okay. Well, it's been a real pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to our next conversation.
All right. Thank you so much. Dr. Lee, any comments on Dr. Nielsen Wright's analysis? It seems like there is a great deal of uncertainties lying ahead of us.
Yeah, well, I do agree with what he said. Trump is tempting to make any concession. I think I also briefly mentioned earlier.
Right.
Not only for the re-election issue, but also he already met Kim Jong-un 3 times.
3 times.
Right? And also, I would say he making enough political investment in many different ways. Then I think you need some kind of fruits now.
Okay.
So I think he would like to make so many concessions. But as you know, it's very hard to make a big deal. So, and also, if he wants to make any concession, he has to change or redefine what he mean by the big deal. And I think that's a very tough issue. And also, virtually, he doesn't have much time and energy to focus on North Korea any longer, as his election battle, re-election battle, as well as the impeachment inquiry took most of his time now.
Okay, very interesting analysis. Exchanging intelligence on North Korea is of great importance for key players in the region. The South Korean government has announced to suspend the termination of GSOMIA, a military information sharing pact with Japan, hours before it was set to expire. Here's more on the story.
The General Security of Military Information Agreement, or GSOMIA, is a bilateral military intelligence sharing pact. South Korea has GSOMIAs with 34 countries, including the US, Canada, and France. In November 2016, Japan became the 33rd country to sign GSOMIA with South Korea. Unlike GSOMIA signed with other countries that never expire or expire in 5 years, South Korea and Japan agreed to renew their military pact every year. GSOMIA had been extended twice since it was signed in 2016. It wasn't until August this year that its renewal emerged as a key issue. On August 2nd, Japan removed South Korea from its white list of countries that enjoy preferential trade treatments. This was following a South Korean Supreme Court ruling that ordered Japanese companies to compensate South Korean victims of wartime forced labor. In response, the South Korean government announced its decision to withdraw from GSOMIA on August 22nd. Since Seoul has been adamant that Japan should first change course and lift its export restrictions, which it imposed on South Korea, citing a breach of trust on national security issues. Over the 3-month period since Seoul's announcement, South Korean and Japanese officials have met on several occasions but failed to find a middle ground. On November 22nd, just 6 hours before GSOMIA was set to expire, the South Korean government announced to conditionally suspend the expiration of the pact.
우리 정부는 언제든지 한일 군사 비밀 정보 보호 협정의 효력을 종료시킬 수 있다는 전제하에 2019년 8월 23일 종료 통보의 효력을 정지시키기로 하였으며 일본 정부는 이에 대한 이해를 표하였습니다.
While the last-minute turnaround provided a quick fix to the GSOMIA issue, it remains to be seen how South Korea and Japan will find a viable solution by the year-end deadline for negotiations.
So GSOMIA was saved because it was supposed to get expired on 22nd of November because Choe, the President's Office of South Korea, decided to postpone the decision. How would you evaluate the whole thing about GSOMIA being saved?
Conditionally saved.
Conditionally, yes, yes.
I think U.S. factor played the greatest role.
Okay.
But still, I think the Korea-Japan relationship is also under consideration. As we see, the Prime Minister Lee Nak-young visited Japan and tried to convey some message, right? And also President Moon tried to having a short talk with Abe afterward. But still, U.S. role is very important. And you remember that in August, when we decided to terminate the GSOMIA, President Moon and Chung Wha-dae said, it is about Korea-Japan. It's nothing to do with the Korea-U.S. alliance. And somehow they mentioned that U.S. kind of understand, but it wasn't that way. And the U.S. was very not only unhappy, but also they said that is against the alliance and that is also against the U.S. security, indicating the troops here, right? So I think that pressure was too big for the Blue House to ignore, although they always listen to their domestic supporters.
Okay. U.S. also must have been anxious about the termination of GSOMIA. We'll connect with an expert based in Washington to hear her observations. We have on the line Soo Kim, policy analyst at the RAND Corporation. Hello.
Thank you for having me.
How is the U.S. reacting to Seoul's decision to conditionally suspend the expiration of its military intelligence sharing agreement with Japan, GSOMIA?
Well, I think it's certainly better than South Korea completely terminating the GSOMIA, but the key word here is conditional. So while this is a temporary stay on South Korea and Japan, I guess, kind of splitting and bifurcating their alliance, there's still a lot that's going to be at play. So South Korea recently threw the ball in Japan's court. I think the National Security Advisor, Chung Eui-young, recently warned the Japanese by saying, "Try me." And I think that was a very powerful statement. It threw the ball in Japan's court, but it's not entirely in Japan's hands right now. So, depending on how and in what direction and in what speed Japan decides to throw the ball into Seoul's court, Seoul can either decide at that time to either continue the agreement or to part ways. So it's certainly a reassuring sign that not just the Japan-South Korea relationship, but the U.S.-South Korea-Japan trilateral and the U.S.-South Korea alliance is, for the time being, it's placed in a temporary stay, but we're not completely resting assured right now.
There have been concerns of possible weakening of South Korea-U.S. alliance lately. Now that the termination has been delayed, at least for the time being, do you think the alliance will remain as strong as before?
Well, that's kind of a difficult question because it's the rift between the U.S. and South Korea. It did not start with the GSOMIA. It started long before. I would say that it started when Washington and South Korea began to see differently on the North Korea problem. So this wasn't the first time where the United States expressed its displeasure or concerns to South Korea about its position and the need for the two countries to be aligned when it comes to dealing with North Korea. And I think that in previous cases, South Korea either chose to dismiss those warnings or decided that perhaps this is something that the two sides can overcome once the inter-Korean engagement and the rapprochement were actually heading, in a progressive path, but clearly that isn't. So recently, the South Korean defense minister met with the Chinese counterpart, and they signed an agreement to increase defense exchanges and I believe also to establish a hotline. And whether or not that's going to be pursued for a long term, remains to be seen. But it also shows to the United States and it signals to Washington that South Korea is considering other options. And for the United States, that South Korea was actually trying to pressure the United States to act as the mediator between Seoul and Japan on the economic and the historical contention. It placed a lot of pressure on the United States, but also it was kind of a daring move on Seoul's part to put Washington in that position. And it also signaled that Seoul is actually ready to consider a departure or something that would completely kind of reconfigure the contours and the outlines of the regional security dynamics as well.
I see. The conditional delay of GSOMIA expiry is definitely a boost for Washington's Indo-Pacific strategy. Do you think the U.S. is likely to actively mediate disputes between South Korea and Japan down the road?
So on the point about this being a definite boost to the Indo-Pacific strategy, I would be cautious and I would calibrate that because the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy, it has in view U.S. long-term interests in the region and beyond. South Korea's decision to participate through its Southern policy and other measures, while it is a reassuring sign for Washington, it may not fit into the longer-term timeline. Also, I think actually the second part of your question was whether or not the U.S. is going to intervene. That is actually going to place Washington in this very uncomfortable spot where, whether or not it decides to respond or put pressure in a neutral fashion, it does sort of pit one ally against the other. So that would mean that Washington is either choosing sides between Seoul and Tokyo, or how it treats Seoul might be perceived differently or perceived more sensitively by the other side. So, and I would say also that Washington has been pretty clear, not just through GSOMIA, not just through the whole trilateral issue, but through its relations with South Korea over the North Korea issue, that it's been pretty clear on where it stands with respect to the alliance, and understanding that there are some still contentious issues with the burden sharing negotiations. The fact of the matter is the position remains consistent, and for Washington at this stage to jump in and try to intervene to get either side to either cave in or to compromise, While it might push us towards a direction and a resolution in the short term, I think it might face some blowback with respect to the U.S.-South Korea alliance, with respect to U.S. relations with Japan, and also the trilateral.
Right. So Kim, policy analyst at the RAND Corporation. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Right, Professor Lee, this is my last question for you. What about the future of trilateral security cooperation among the United States, South Korea, and Japan? Are there any positive signs for better cooperation in trilateral settings?
Well, the delay of GSOMIA termination, although we said conditional, it might not be that easy to make another different decision, right? So I think anyway, that decision somehow help improve our relation with Japan and our relation with the U.S. and our relation with Japan and U.S. at the same time. But still, I think we have to be, again, very strategical about this changing security environment. Although I think we are rather emotional toward the Japan's decision of those trade restriction and etc. I think Japan was more strategical and very practical. What I'm saying is that with intensifying hegemonic competition between U.S. and China, I think Japan tried to build their position for their own sake, right? For that, I think we have to understand their redefinition of the relation with the South Korea as well. So we should not be too emotional, or we should not be too political when we deal with the Japan. And also, I think we should remember that U.S. most important Asian policy is China. So to deal with China, either engage or contain, I think U.S. need a partner. And I think they already decide Japan is the most important alliance or the important partner to deal with China. I think in that context, we have to making our strategic choice. So I don't think we have much room or leverage to make a choice, unfortunately. So I think we have to believe that why China and Russia, despite their long-standing conflict and long-standing animosity, they try to core each other alliance. I think that is against the maritime power, right? And I think that gave a good lesson for us.
Learning good lessons and building strategic positions seems like the homework for South Korea in the future. All right, Professor Lee, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And that's all we have for you today. We'll be back next week with more Korean Peninsula issues. Thanks for watching.